last week we had ended with this piece over here, Amru Sham Sheva Yamim Kodem Yom Kippurim. So the Chazal learned from Moshe Rabbeinu being separated for 6 days. Well, for 6 days before Har Sinai, that that a Kohen Gadol before Yom Kippur should be separated for 6 days, and the or 7 days, but Yom Kippur is the seventh day. So, and similarly, the Kohen is preparing the Parah Aduma. We learn this from the Gemara in Yuma, which darshans the pasuk Vayishkon Kvod Hashem al Har Sinai. The Hashem's glory rested or dwelled on Har Sinai. V'chaseu anan sheishes yamim, and the cloud covered it for 6 days. Then a piece of the Gemara doesn't quote Vayikra Moshe b'yom hashvi'i mitoch ha'anan. Now, because this piece is not quoted in the Ran's version of the Gemara, he has the freedom to understand this as a kal v'chomer. So my sheishes yamim. So what's his kal v'chomer? Why does it say 6 days? Zebon of this creates a general rule. Shekol hanichnas b'machne shechina ton pri sheshisha. Anybody who enters the domain of the Shekhinah has to be separated beforehand for 6 days. And this is the whole story about Kiisha Kushas Lokach, because Moshe was always 6 days before Revelation. So he was always separated from his wife. And but here we're talking about Har Sinai, and we see that it's a 6 days a separation, and on the seventh day one can enter the Machane Shechina. So I saw in the art scroll in the footnotes, it mentioned that the way our Gemara looks, because our Gemara quotes both halves of the pasuk, Sheishes Yamim, and then Bayom HaShvi'i. So when it asks my Sheishes Yamim, why does it looks like it's an extra phrase in the pasuk that the Gemara is darshaning? Why do you need to say 6 days? It already said he entered on the seventh, or it's about to say he entered on the seventh. So why do you need both? Whoever did the footnotes noticed, though, that there's not one manuscript of the Gemara that actually quotes the full pasuk, and that frees the Ran up to when the Ran's learning the Gemara, he doesn't learn it in terms of extra words in the pasuk. So now he asks the question, and this was our cliffhanger at the end of last week. V'yesh kan she'ela. So now we have a question. Ech limdu mi Moshe Rabbeinu l'kohen gadol b'yom kippurim kohen hasori fesapara. How could you learn from Moshe to the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur and the Kohen who burns the Parah Aduma? V'alo ein melabdim kal michomer lahachmir love. It's one thing to learn a kal v'chomer. It's another thing to learn a chomer v'kal. Meaning, the fact that Moshe had to separate before coming up on Har Sinai. Well, coming up on Har Sinai was a much more momentous, what's it called, separation, entry into the divine space. Much more so than it was once in history, right? Yom Kippur is annual, right? So how do you learn out from Moshe, which is an extreme case, that the same thing should apply to the Kohen Gadol, which is a less extreme case? So if he had understood the Derashah to be extra words, then it's extra words, and you don't go into a logic, a kal v'chomer kind of argument. But he doesn't learn it. I mean, the Gemara didn't have those words there originally, and he learns it as a kal v'chomer. So he doesn't understand how you're learning from Moshe Rabbeinu to the Kohen Gadol and the Kohen burning the Parah Aduma. If you're going to say that this Mamad Har Sinai, which had nothing else like it, was unique in history, I would say sui generis, but I'm not really sure I have how to pronounce it correctly, so I won't say that. Hayaton Prisha, Eich Nilma. So a once in a history event requires Prisha, requires separation. Eich Nilma Mitzvah Kohen Gadol, B'Yom Kippur, Kohen Esar Fesach Para. So how could you learn from the once in a history event to less extreme entries into the Makom Shechina? Vachuvahu. So his answer is interesting. His answer is Kashinu Vayispalos, change and working on oneself. Lihit Pa'el, like Pa'el is to work or cause change. His Pilos is to change oneself. So changing and working on oneself, Lo Yavo Ki Im Mitzad only comes from encountering the opposite. And that's why I wrote here as a subtitle for this part of the Derashah, change is driven by thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. Right? It's very Hegelian. I mean, the way I'm reading him, at least. You don't change unless you encounter your opposite. So the thesis stays the thesis until it meets the antithesis. I also noted in my little notes here on my marked up copy that it reminded me of the first Derashah, where the first Derashah, remember the Ron contrasts between a diverse community, right, which Chazal compared to the Kalbona being in the Torah, right? Like we have to daven with the sinners, and this is you have a diverse community, and each one brings out something from the other one. So what one person lacks, the other one has, and therefore the community as a whole lacks nothing. But there also, he talked about the fact that if you have a community where everybody is generous, you're going to feed on each other until people are just wasting money. And if you have a community where everybody is stingy, right, it's just going to feed on itself and people will just get stingier and stingier. So each of the midos, if you're only encountering your own, get more and more extreme. And where you get to the midah beinonis, or a golden mean, as everybody like loosely translates it in the Rambam, is to be part of a diversity. And therefore, I saw it kind of here, right? If you don't change on your own, or if you only encounter things like yourself, you have to encounter your opposite. So if you live in an echo chamber, you're not going to change. So that was sort of I saw a link between those two drushes. And therefore, separated intelligences, which is what we would call angels, or malachim in the sense of the word angel as opposed to other messengers. Lahalos hefech mehem lo yikablu hashinoi. Since they have a lack of opposite, they will never encounter their opposites. They can never change. Aval yiyu tamid seichel b'pol. They're always actively thinking, or an active intellect. But they exist in the present, not in the potential. Lo yaskilu ace v'yaskilu ace. They will not become wise at some times and foolish at other times. And I thought it was an interesting pun he played there. Seichel and Seichel with a sin and with a samach. But the thing is that a malach is always actively thinking. He's not. Malach never has a potential that they're not using, because they're never encountering anything but themselves.
In the world of thought, right? In the world of intellect, and it sounds like I've seen in Aryeh Kaplan, that basically the whole upper worlds are all more, it seems to me, are more intellectual things, and that's what it seems like you're saying also from here, the Solomon of Tholim. Then why isn't on that level things that interact? We find, for example, the Gemara says in Shabbos how Moshe Rabbeinu and the Malachim had a fight, an argument, right? How could they have an argument?
Right.
So if there's no way
There's no
of
diversity.
interacting,
I was going to bring in a different example. Shalom and MS voted against the creation of man, right? And Chesed and who was the fourth one?
I would be happier to say that that's a mashal than the Gemara in Shabbos.
But either way, they're intellectual properties that are in conflict, even though they're all
Yeah,
positive.
they may not have their own sense of self.
Right.
They're
Yeah, but right. But where I was going with it was that you can, just in the realm of intellects, have conflict even among malachim because even positive values can conflict. That's where I was going to take it. I mean,
like so like
it's a different
really
example of the same thing.
many
Moshe.
paradoxes like that, right? I don't know, the train
Yeah,
problem.
yeah. The trolley problem.
Trolley problem, yes, the trolley problem.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
So,
Right. You get into right. No, but the reason why when I hit paradox, I went to that medrash is because I think that shalom and ms is like one of the more critical value conflicts that people have lamaisa.
I hear that. That's very interesting. I never thought of it that way, but I hear it makes sense.
And I think that that has a lot to do with the medrash and why and the fact that ms is thrown to the ground and not shalom, right? Like the whole process of history is ms merits tatzmiach, right? That truth grows up from the ground. Shalom you need from day one, or else you don't get anywhere. But MS you could allow to grow, and that's the whole process of history. And if you
Oh,
really, yeah, if you really
I,
want to know what pages that is in the book, I'll tell you afterwards
okay,
because
but
I don't have it in front of me. Yeah,
I can give you a riot to what you're saying, which is the Isis Shalom Bimraimav, right? She
right.
makes
Who? Yeah,
if there's no hefech, then why is there any need to make shalom?
yeah. But yeah. So I'm not really sure how he makes this argument. But Lamaisa, we do say that Malachim are omdim,
Right.
right? And that's why Yecheskel sees them with one leg, right? Because they don't have anywhere to go.
Bro.
Although they have wings, and Daniel sees them flying across the universe in one flap of the wings. Sorry. Uh, Malkiel flaps in one flap of the wings. Gavriel flaps in two. The Rambam says because Gavura needs to check with Chesed before it does anything. So it has to go to Malkiel and then come down to the world. That's why it takes two flaps. It's a
Bracha
cute
says
little Derashah. What?
Bracha says a different reason, I think.
Okay. But either way, they do move despite only having one leg. But the fact that they don't change is perceived in the when the navi takes a malach and gives it a gashmin parable, he sees the lack of change as being on one al regalachas. And notice al regalachas is only one value. The kolatarikula al regalachas does not involve dialectics. It's one value. That is a plausible shot, Steg, of Palatarakula al regalachas, not a measure of time, but explain the whole Torah in terms of one principle.
Cool. Thank you.
But let's get back to we're getting very far. So yes, I
So,
share Moshe Yehuda's. What were you saying?
No, so speaking of this, maybe I missed something, or maybe it's going to be clear later, but when he says, so he's about to say, Aval anachnu limatze'afech banu nishtana. So maybe could it be not that angels never encounter their opposite or encounter difference, but that they never contain opposites within them, each of them
Right.
represents only a single
Yeah,
principle.
that does work. That does work pretty well. Let's see the words. Kedever lo yishtana mitzad atzmo
But
v'lo mitzad domehu. I think that's why. So I saw domehu atzmo as the malach. But let's say atzmo is like one aspect of the malach. The malachim don't have two aspects, and therefore they never change. By the way, that's true by definition. The reason why every malach only has one job is that by definition, two jobs will be two malachim. A malach is an entity that is sent to do something. If there are two things to be done, it's automatically two malachim. It's like you can't have two
unless
elementary.
unless the things are similar, the same goal, same kind of goal.
Well, if they're aspects of one task, yeah,
By the ones who saved light,
right.
right?
But the what's called the what was I gonna say? I don't know. I lost my train of thought.
I just want to correct what I said before. It's that the Gemara Brachas does talk about Michal with one jump and Gabriel with two, but it doesn't say the reason for it. So it does say it, but not the reason. So I take it back.
It's not really a jump, it's one flap. It's the ofef.
More yes. Two Rashi says plichos.
Okay. When I learned it, the Malbim with Rabbi Eisenman, he translated as what's called. That was when I was laid off. I hung around the base medrash for a while. And then some friends of ours convinced me to go back for smicha because I have all this time on my hands. Anyway, there'll always be an actively intellectual yiskelu eis v'yeskelu eis, right? We find the opposite within us, so we can change. I like that, Steg. That's a good shot. I'm running with it. Tam niyeh chachamim, upam sichlim. There are times we are wise, and there are times we are fools, which raises the question of whether the Mishlei was written in archetypes. Right? When he talks about the ksil, is he talking about a person who is foolish or the foolish aspect of a person? And everybody's a ksil sometimes. Haran seems to be saying that, no? Neda,
I think.
what?
Us ourselves. We go back and forth between the two.
Yeah, no, that's definitely what he's saying. The question is that when Mishlei refers to the ksil and the chacham, is he referring to a person who is wise, or is he referring to the archetype of a wise person? Sometimes that's me, and sometimes that's not me.
Well, there's some people who are only on one side.
Well, he's about to say only Moshe. Neda achar shenistakel v'niskal achar sheneda. Right? We know after we think, and we think after we know. We're all in potential chachamim. Tamid lahotzi ala poel. But we always have to take that potential and make it actualized. We also know that once we take some of our potential and turn it from potential to actual, Benaskil tischadesh lanu poel v'naskil, and we become enlightened. Tischadesh lanu amima, we go back to being dull. Umechshach, and in darkness. V'nitzrech lahotzi ala poel mashikfar yatza. We have to bring into actuality something we once brought into actuality before. Mishav amum, and became dull. So normal people, you have your good days and your bad days. V'zos hi madregas kol adam, and that is the potential of everybody. Lo savor zeh kfia teva. You cannot change this in a natural way. Efshari, teva efshari, the natural possibilities, b'shum panim, in any way. Amnam madregas Moshe Rabbeinu alav shalom. However, Moshe wasn't natural. Remember, that was his thesis last time. Moshe's nevu'ah was gifted by Kadosh Baruch Hu. Shahisa l'malam min hateva. He was on a above natural, a supernatural plane. Commotion inspire, like we explained. Haisa niskava mizos. He was above this. He was kihu haya seichel b'poel. He was an active intellect. Lo haya lo koach shelo yatza l'poel, and he had no potentials that he didn't make manifest in the actual. This is very hard to explain then why he hit the rock. Right? Because he did have a period of failing. So you're gonna say that it was because he lacked even the potential not to hit the rock? Then why would he get punished for it? Because then, he's an ones.
So
Maybe it wasn't a punishment. I mean, maybe it was just, it proved the necessity to get the Yoshua on the stage. But he does get yelled at. I mean, it's kind of hard to, more than once, HaKadosh Baruch Hu isn't happy with Moshe. It's kind of hard to, I don't understand the statements. Stag, you want to save me again?
so I had a student years ago in one of my first teaching jobs who theorized about Shlomo HaMelech, that the Navi says that he was the most chacham of anyone, and yet he still made these very serious errors. And so she said that maybe wisdom and foolishness aren't like a single spectrum where you slide back and forth from one to the other. Maybe it's two separate inventories. And Shlomo got filled up with the chokhmah, but whatever amount of sichlut he already had was not taken away. So I haven't thought through enough whether that would apply here as an explanation, but if it's saying that Moshe Rabbeinu actualized his entire potential of wisdom, maybe that wouldn't necessarily counteract other potentialities he also had to make mistakes.
Unless he's saying that Moshe is a seichel b'poel, like he described Malachim, and therefore he didn't contain conflicting drives. In which case, how would you put it here? How would you fit your answer?
Right. Well, is seichel b'poel the same thing as seichel nefrad?
No. Seichel nefrad is a intellect that is unencumbered by a body. Okay, and that's why it's normally the word for a malach. The active intellect is a special thing in Aristotelian thought. It's like the link between the intellectual and the physical. Right? The Rambam discusses it as like what a navi, the point that a navi connects to. Like he gets so high that he can experience the seichel poel. But there's also the idea of poel is real as opposed to koach. Right? I mean, in their worldview, these are overlapping things, right? We talk about potential energy versus actual, action, right? So same thing with koach and poel. And so unlike a human mind, which is sometimes thinking more and sometimes thinking less, it's always thinking everything. So that's kind of the difference between them. I don't really, then there's all machlokas among Rishonim whether the active intellect is above the spheres or below the spheres. Like, is it malachim, the active intellect, and then the spheres? The planets, the orbits of the planets, or is it the orbits of the planets, the moon, and then the active intellect, and then the Earth? But I don't know what any of that is. I mean, I don't relate. It's one part of Aristotelian thought I haven't gotten to the bottom of, and I also don't know if the Ran's all that Aristotelian. But that's the language he's speaking. That's what the rationalist Rishonim were talking about, because that's what philosophy was in their day. So I don't really know how to take the nuances of seichel b'poal in this phrase. But Moshe is being described as fully actualized intellect, and always thinking. He's never a ksil. And yes, I said ksil instead of seichel because I don't know how to pronounce the sin and the samach differently. I don't even think. Well, I don't think most havarahs had to. Whatever. Totally different topic. And with Steg in the room, we could go on a tangent there. That's too far. But anyway, v'lo haya gam kain sichlo achar sheshav b'poal mischadesh alai v'leius v'chisaron. Right? It's not going to. It's not going to renew fault and defect, tiredness. Elias is really here to assimilate, but simulate, sloth and defects. Sheyashiv koach shalom nishar l'sichlo mesech klal. That there would be a potential that doesn't remain in the intellect at all. But na'ala kol hafech mimenu, he lacked all opposite. He shoved b'madregat seichel nivdal, because he reached the level of a separated intellect. So Moshe's psyche was not influenced by the fact that it sat in the brain. It was a seichel nivdal. That's why he was able to experience HaKadosh Baruch Hu without metaphors, because his brain didn't need things in physical terms. Right? He could see a malach and leave it a malach. He didn't need to look like something. And he taught this when he said, "Vayomer aleim Moshe." Moshe said to them, who are the them, by the way? Just I looked up the Pesach to get context. These are the people who were tamei on Pesach. So Moshe said to them, "Imdu, stand here for a minute. Veshma'an, I will hear, I will listen. Ma'yitzav Hashem lachem, what Hashem will command to you or about you." What's the explanation? He could get nevu'ah whenever he wanted. He didn't have to work himself up to it, because he didn't have the potential for nevu'ah that wasn't always actualized. So he could always just, get nevu'ah whenever. V'yaduahu she'elu aprishus kamo shamru zal, and it is well known that these separations, like the 6-day separations that we were talking about at the beginning of this discussion, kamo shamru zal, like Chazal said, im kadeshi yispoded ha'adam ba'osam yimei aprisha, that a person would be alone in these days of separation, but Hashem Yisparach, right? He would be alone in the ways of Hashem, Bavodaso and Avodas Hashem, a Mutelas love which is bestowed to him, Yavshid Atzmo Midimyonos, Kashmiyim, and he'll separate himself from physical imagery or imaginations, Hamonin Shleimuso, which hold back his wholeness. And and will take out into the actual what he has in potential. And this is a need for a regular person, for an every man who has a seichel of potential and of actual. Aval Moshe Rabbeinu alav shalom, shal yasichli b'poal, he was entirely actualized intellect. Lama to'en prisha, why did he need separation? Hanishar alav Pesach klal v'dimyon, machid yitzdarch lichaletz mimenu. Did he need to? Did he have any veil or image that would get in his way, that he had to like flee from it? If that were true, then how could he possibly just have nevu'ah whenever the fichach Omar? Okay, so this thought allows the Ran to flip the Kal V'chomer around, because it's no longer that Har Sinai was something so unique. How do you learn from something less unique? How do you learn from something so unique? If you have to separate for Har Sinai, how do you know that means you also have to separate for Yom Kippur? The Kohen Gadol would have to separate in order to be ready for Yom Kippur. Maybe the Kohen Gadol isn't reaching that level of divine presence that he needs to separate. But here now the Kal V'chomer gets turned around. Moshe, who had no actual need to be separated, was still commanded to stay separate for 6 days before the revelation on Har Sinai. Kal V'chomer, people who actually need separation in order to face the divine, should. So that was the point of that whole argument about Moshe being unchanging like a malach and always ready to receive nevuah. Lefichach Omar, therefore it said, "My sheishes yamim." That when the Gemara says, "What's the 6 days?" It's saying, for Moshe Rabbeinu, what did he need the 6 days for? Klamar ein safek shazos haprisha lo itzricha pasuk b'shil Moshe. It's obvious that this pasuk, that this prisha was not needed to be written for Moshe's sake. Ki hu lo hayatzarich lezeh. He didn't need to separate. Elazeh binyan av l'chol ha'acherim. Moshe said an example. So the binyan av is not the pasuk. It's Moshe was told to do this as a binyan av for the other people who do need the separation. Sheyichnesu l'machne shechina, when they enter the machne shechina, yitanu prisha, they need to be separate for 6 days first. And then only enter on the 7th. V'sheyidanu kal v'chomer ba'atzmam, Moshe Rabbeinu. So now they can make a kal v'chomer in themselves from Moshe. Shelo hayat tzarich lazeh. Moshe didn't need to separate. Kilo alav shalom. How you call it? Ito shavos. Because for him, alav shalom, all the times were the same. Because he was in a supernatural state. So all of this continues what we were learning last week about Moshe's nevu'ah being a supernatural kind of nevu'ah, as opposed to regular nevu'ah being within the realm of nature. So among the things he says is that because Moshe was in a supernatural state, so therefore the Gemara could learn that even if, right, the only way the Gemara makes sense is if Moshe needed separation less than other people, even though Har Sinai was a greater presence of the divine. And this is his argument that Moshe was on a different plane than any Kohen Gadol. The Imkain. If so, we got to wonder. Achar she'shlimo Hashem yisbarach, b'ma she'shlimo. So now we're moving on to another topic. If Hashem made him perfect in the ways that he made him perfect, right? Remember, Moshe's nevuah is miraculous. So it wasn't Moshe's accomplishment, it was a gift from Hashem. That's kind of what we mean by miraculous, right? At least in the context of nevu'ah, because none of nevu'ah is like what we would call nature. I mean, it's all metaphysical. It's not right. That Hashem made him some supernatural being that wasn't like a regular person. Why would Hashem want to withhold from him some element of shleimus, shem b'teva anoshi, which a human being can reach, lahasik b'shleimus harbe, that a person could be very perfect in some way, and Hashem would decide not to give it to Moshe. V'im tasha v'tomar ki ein mitnai malas hanavi. Okay, so what's he talking about? He's talking about Moshe's inability to speak clearly, whatever the kavad pem means, kavad lashon, right? That flaw. Why didn't Hashem? Right, once Hashem's bequeathing him some kind of intellectual perfection, why didn't he bequeath on him also physical perfection, like normal human perfection? Bim tashiv v'tomar. If you want to answer and say, "Ki ein mitnai malas hanavi rak she'yishalem malos sichlios," that the only thing a navi needs is intellectual perfection. Lo she'yishalem kol malos acheros. He doesn't need other kinds of perfection, which rely on physical abilities, physical potentials. Ein hadavar kain. It's not so. Sharei amar b'perek ein bein hamoded. So it says in Nedarim on Lamed Ches Amud Aleph, ein hanevu'ah shorel al chacham gibar v'ashir v'ana v'kula b'Moshe. And it's such a paraphrase that I didn't bother trying to insert it in the text. I put it here on the side. Rabbi Yochanan ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu masher shechina. So Ella al Gibor v'Ashir v'Chacham ba'anav v'Kulam mi Moshe. Gibor t'chsiv, and then he quotes these psukim, which we're going to encounter on the next page. Bari Gibor v'Ashir eino malo sichlios. Two of those are not intellectual perfection. But if a navi needs to be a chacham, a gibor, an ashir, and an anav, so chacham is intellectual perfection. Anivas is mida perfection. But what about gibor and ashir? Right. So you see that that Hashem expects a navi to be perfect on the physical level as well. So why wouldn't Hashem fix Moshe's speech impediment? It's a good question, no? But we're not going to get to the answer because I got a huge detour on page 5. Just forewarning you.
Small detour before the big detour?
Sure. That's why it's that's why our logo is two speech bubbles over a book.
Right.
Yeah.
Is it possible? Like, why isn't the run? Okay, let's start this other way. Sorry. There's a chazal that says that the reason why Moshe had lashon was the whole story with the jewels and the fire, the coal with para and all that. So that's personal agency for a little kid, maybe, but personal agency. He made a choice way back then, and that caused the physical imperfection. Why is it that the fact that something happened clearly before he was ready to be a navi should be considered a problem afterwards? In other words, it's not.
I didn't see that. I saw his question though as being phrased differently. If Hashem's going to gift him with a kind of nevu'ah that a person can't get on their own, then why wouldn't Hashem heal his speech?
Okay.
Right? Like once he's bestowing gifts, why not just bestow everything, right? No, I mean that was the shalo sheyishalem b'chol malos acheros. I read that as giving shleimus. Yeshalem, he will, right?
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
I could be wrong. I mean, I've
I see what you're saying.
But that was the way I saw it, so I didn't have that question.
Understood.
Um, and all of them were true of Moshe. Gibor and Ashir are not intellectual accomplishments. Below Malos Midosios, and they're not Mida, accomplishments. They're not, great Midos. Im Kolzeh Mitzanai Navi, still a Navi is conditional on having these qualities. Afal Pi Sheyesh Misha Yafaresh Ki Begibor Ratzah Kovesh Yitzro. So there are some who take the Mishnah Ben Zoma and they use it to explain these 4 qualities. So let's look at Ben Zoma here. Ben Zoma Omer. He's a Chacham Halomei Mikol Adam, who is wise, somebody who learns from everybody. Shenemar Mikol Melamdai Yiskalti, from everybody that I learned, I became enlightened. Keadosecha Sichali, because you're Eidos, right? That's praise of the Torah. He's a Gibor, a Koveshet Yitro. What does a Gibor mean? Somebody who conquers his Yitzer. Hara Shenemar. But that's a whole question, by the way. Which members of Chazal talk about a Yetzer Tov, and which ones the word Yetzer is always the Yetzer Hara? It may only be a semantic issue and not an actual difference in like how they viewed the human. But you'll notice that sometimes you see Yetzer, in Paga about Hayetzer, Mashchayil, Beis HaSefer, doesn't say, if the Yetzer Hara comes, drag him to the base medrash. It says, if the Yetzer comes. That here also, Kovesh it's Yitzro. It doesn't say Yetzer Hara, but it's obviously the Yetzer we call the Yetzer Hara. Ezehu Ashir, who's wealthy, Asamech Bechalko, Shenemar, right? Ezehu Mechubad, Hamachabed Esabrios. So in all 4 qualities, they become Mida qualities, right? So the Gibor is not just somebody who is strong, it's somebody who can conquer his Yetzer Hara. The Ashir is not somebody who's wealthy, it's somebody who can learn his tapkos, right? They can be happy with what they have. Even the Chacham ends up being a Mida thing, not a straight intellectual thing. It's Halomei Mikol Adam, right? So these are 4 Mida qualities. So Afal Pi Sheish Misha Shapirish Kibigibor Ratzak Kovashitz Yitro Ba'asher Misha Yabo Midas his tapkos. Right, which is what I just said, right? That they're reinterpreting the terms using Ben Zoma. If you notice, though, the terms line up with the 4, right? You have Gibor, Ashir, Chacham, and Anav in our quote here, in the Gemara of what a Navi has to be. And Ben Zoma talks about Chacham, Gibor. The 2 of them are the same, if in a different order. Ashir is also the same. Umechubad, with the 4th element, it's a broken parallel. In other words, he doesn't define a nava in terms of something more subtle. He defines who gets honor in terms of honoring others, which may be a form of a nava. I mean, one could argue that somebody who honors everybody else that's a form of a nava. I mean, in a relative sense, he's not placing himself above other people in either case. So in a relative sense, but either way, that's the answer, not the question, right? Ashir, he translates what an ashir is. He doesn't translate what an anav is. He translates a mechubad in terms of something one might say is anava. So the parallel doesn't really work perfectly. There are those who explain the whole thing of the qualities of a navi because they can't believe that God would only speak to somebody if they're rich and strong. Eina davar came, but the Ran rejects that parallel. Sharei sham b'nedarim kisha'amru v'chulam b'moshe uchichu. So they said, and all of them were in Moshe. And it brings sources, and that's why I have the psukim on the page. Gibor, how do we get that Moshe is a Gibor? Me ve'es posh v'shnei luchos. I was grabbing the two luchos. So you see that Moshe was strong. But Ashir me pesolicha. Ashir from the fact that the pasuk says pesolicha, which yet another Gemara says you should carve for yourself because Moshe became wealthy by selling the pieces of sapphire or lapis lazuli that he carved off the luchos to make the second luchos. So we have psukim. The Gemara is bringing psukim to say that Moshe was strong and Moshe was wealthy. So you see that the strong, it doesn't bring a pasuk proving that Moshe conquered his Yitzhara. The wealthy, it doesn't bring a pasuk that says Moshe was happy with nothing. With whatever he had was good. No, it shows an actual case of strength and an actual case of wealth. So he denies using the Mishnah of Ben Zoma to reinterpret the Gemara. These psukim aren't proving intellectual properties. Lo lamalos and midos klal, and not midos qualities. Roy sheyi yeshalem kol hashleimus shem inyan nechbad ene hamon lamalos klali. It is appropriate that they be perfect in all of the kinds of perfection that the masses would consider, right? Would consider, the entirety. Ki shaliach alehem, because he sent to them, l'man yiyu devarat nishmaim. He's saying very simply, if you're not wealthy and strong, people don't follow you. So therefore, a navi actually needs these qualities because he can't influence the people to get them above listening to people who, just because they're rich. You're in a catch-22, right? The navi should be teaching them not to just listen to rich people more than poor people, but he can't unless he's rich enough that they listen to him before he tells them that. Before he changes them, right? Okay, maybe that's not what the Ran means, but in any case, the Ran is saying that people don't listen to somebody who is weak and poor the way they listen to somebody who is strong and rich. And how tall was George Washington? 6'8". He stood head and shoulders above everybody else. Kind of like, the expression head and shoulders is a pasuk about Shaul, right? Being head and shoulders above everybody else. So you see that people, they it's easier to be charismatic when you're wealthy and strong.
I heard a sort of parallel Dvar Torah about the Kohanim with physical mum.
Right. So right. The idea that a Baal Mum can't serve. Right. So I heard something similar, or maybe I made up something similar. I don't know. But I didn't see it as the masses won't listen to him as much as the masses will be, he'll share their kavana, they'll be thinking about him and not about the avoda, which is related, but I don't think it's exactly the same because a Kohen who is a Kohen with a mum still gets truma, still can eat truma, and therefore is still freed up to teach. So being a mum doesn't puzzle you from teaching; it puzzles you from avoda.
Right, and so the avoda is if I remember this Dvar Torah correctly, was about.
Well, that's why when I made something up, I said it was about distracting from the avoda as opposed to people won't listen to him because people still expect me. He's still expected to be a teacher.
Right, but I think the variant that I heard was
Yeah.
A twist on not simply being distracted, but in the sense that a distraction through what someone would consider a defect in the sort of dramatic pageantry of the avoda in the Beis Mikdash. Also, it's sort of playing into people's aesthetic assumptions / needs.
Right. Whereas nowadays we would,
Meanwhile, the Kohen with the moon can still do everything else. So,
nowadays we would wonder if it isn't self-fulfilling.
right.
Like if we had we had more handicapped people front and center, would we stop reacting that way? Right. So
Yeah.
I mean, I heard that explanation, or I made up a variant of that explanation, but I'm not really sure exactly how well it sits with me. Because it's kind of like you're never going to get out of the hole that way.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I have similar problems with affirmative action. On the one hand, you're again making it about race. On the other hand, if you don't, how do you ever break the status quo? I just don't know these things. I'm not advocating either side. I'm just in over my head.
Right.
I wish more people would admit when things are in over their head instead of giving opinions anyway. But okay. So I wanted to quote something here from near the end of Mor Nevu'ah. So I found the Pines translation online, although it has ellipses in it that I didn't put there. I just didn't want to type the whole thing myself. But it's so much better than Friedlander's translation that I went with it, even though it has gaps. So he says here, and I'm using the English, not the Hebrew, because the original is neither anyway. So, I mean, Hebrew may feel more authentic, but it is. The ancient and modern philosophers have made it clear that, by the way, when we're talking modern, the Rambam saying modern, not us, have made it clear that the perfections to be found in men consist of four species. The first and most effective, with a view to which the people of the earth spend their lives, perfection in possessions, that is, of what belongs to the individual, in the matter of money, garments, tools, slaves, land, and other things of this kind. So the lowest perfection is property. I'll skip a little. The second species is more connected to yourself, and that's perfection of the bodily constitution and shape. I refer to the individual's temperament being most harmonious, his limbs well proportioned and strong as they will be. So the lowest is property. The second one is the physical body. Third species of perfection, to a greater extent than the species consists the individual self. So the third is even more totally on the individual. And there's a perfection of moral virtues. So midos is the third level of perfection. And the fourth is true human perfection, acquisition of the rational virtues, refer to the conception of intelligible, to teach true opinions of the divine beings. So you notice the Rambam's four perfections in the Rambam's four perfections is the same as what we're saying of the Navi's four perfections. The lowest is Gevura. The lowest is Ashir, right? The first is um, perfection of possessions. The second is Gibor, perfection of bodily constitution and shape. The third is Midos, or Anava, I guess, in this list. And the fourth is Chacham. I personally have one of the things I cannot accept about the Rambam's Hashkafa is that he places Midos ahead of Chachma. Well, lower, before, not ahead as in more important. Ahead as a prerequisite of Chachma. And Chachma is the true human perfection. And all the other perfections are just a value to the way that you get to, a value in the way that you get to the Chachma. Right. I think, especially like since Freud, and maybe since Rav Yisrael Salanter, or maybe since moderns in general, kind of noticed that thought follows emotion more than the other way around. And you'll never really reach the truth if you don't work on the midos first. So I don't know. I mean, the Rambam wants you to be Baal Chesed because that's the logical thing to do once you understand God and Chesed and so on. He thinks it's better than being about chesed because you have the midah of chesed. Like to be so intellectually refined that you could go above your inclinations, even the positive ones, and act the right way because you know it's the right way intellectually. And that's the next piece of the Morah, the closing words of the Morah, which we won't get to. And then he quotes the Navi in Yirmiyahu, says the same four perfections. Ko amar Hashem al Yishalel chacham b'chachmaso, al Yishalel ha'gibor b'gvuraso, al Yishalel ashir be'ashro, ki im bezos Yishalel HaMishalel ha'seichel v'yodeo si, ki ani Hashem oseh chesed, mishpat u'tzedakah. And then he talks about the need for chesed, mishpat, and tzedakah. He doesn't mention the fact that al Yishalel chacham b'chachmaso would reinforce the Mussernik's idea that Chachma is needed to have the right midos, and not midos are needed to have the right Chachma. But, that's neither here nor there. I mean, we're not going to go beyond the end of this quote. It's just interesting that the Rambam talks about these same four perfections. If you understand Anova as a perfection of midos, or perfection of the key midah, and therefore the perfection of the rest of midos follow. So these are the four perfections. And notice that the Rambam is saying that wealth, people spend their whole life trying to be wealthy. That's the perfection people spend all their time pursuing. Most people, not people in chinuch, they know they'll never be wealthy. Sorry, I had to. Anyway, so he says that these are four forms of perfection. According to the Rambam, there'd be a different reason than the Ran gives. So the Ran says, why do we need a chacham and why do we need a ashir and a gibor? Because that's who people listen to, and the job of a navi is to teach, Hashem's message. The Rambam says, why do we need it? Because until you have a certain amount of wealth and a certain amount of strength, you're not going to have the resources to perfect the midos and the right. He sees as a ladder. Right. If you're busy scrambling for your next meal, you're not going to be sitting there contemplating life's deeper truths.
Yeah. It's what's it called again? Maslow's hierarchy of needs.